I am Bella Powell, 32 years old, a military captain and a single mother. 2 weeks ago, at my sister's wedding, in front of 200 guests, she grabbed the microphone and announced loudly, "My sister is used goods, a defective item no man would ever want." The ballroom erupted in laughter. My own mother screamed out, "She's trash." My father just held his champagne glass, hid his mouth, and sneered. I was trained to stay calm in front of loaded guns. But then, as my 5-year-old son, Ethan, sat right next to me, his small hand gripping mine, his eyes wide and confused as he watched people mock his mother, he whispered, "Mommy, why are they laughing at you?" My heart felt like it was being crushed. But in that crazy room, there was one man who wasn't laughing. And what he did next changed everything. Before I tell you the rest, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you really want to hear this story. Where are you watching from? What time is it where you are? Leave a comment and let me know. To understand how we got here, I need to go back to the start. In Greenwich, status isn't just about the car in the driveway. It is measured in square feet and which way your windows face. At the Powell house, love was a commodity, and I was perpetually out of stock. Vivian's room was in the East Wing. It was a sanctuary of eggshell-colored walls and white silk curtains that caught every ounce of the morning sun. It smelled like expensive vanilla and unearned privilege. I lived at the far end of the hall, squeezed into a space right next to the noisy boiler room. My room didn't have a theme. It had 3 cardboard boxes filled with my dad's old clothes and a single twin mattress on the floor. When the pipes rattled and hissed in the dead of winter, I'd pull an old, scratchy army surplus wool blanket over my head to stop the shivering. My mother never apologized for the arrangement. She'd just sit there, buffing her nails, never even looking up at me. "You're just easier to please, Bella," she'd say, her voice as thin as a razor blade. "Vivian is sensitive. She needs the space. She needs the light." That was my first lesson in survival. If you don't make a scene, they won't feel guilty about throwing you away. The unfairness had a price tag too. When I was 17 and Vivian was 13, prom season hit. Vivian just pointed at a glossy magazine page, a Sherry Hill gown, all beads and shimmering fabric. The next day, it was sitting on her bed, $500. When I asked for money for my own senior prom, my mother just adjusted her glasses and looked through me. "You're not the flashy type, Bella. Don't try to be something you aren't." She slid a $20 bill across the counter like she was tipping a waitress. I took the 20. That afternoon, I worked a double shift at a greasy fast food joint, hauling heavy trays of fries and wiping down salt-slicked tables for 12 hours straight. The smell of old cooking oil clung to my skin, but I needed the cash. I walked into Macy's with sore feet and a pocket full of crumpled bills. I spent hours digging through the clearance racks until I found it. A deep navy dress for $63. I bought it with my own sweat. It was a piece of fabric meant to prove I actually existed. My father was the quiet one. He didn't yell, but his silence was a heavy, suffocating thing, like wet concrete pouring over an open wound. The night I stood in front of the mirror in my $63 dress, he walked by. He stopped and looked at me, then looked into Vivian's room where she was twirling in her $500 gown. He didn't say I looked nice. Instead, he reached into his pocket and fished out a $10 bill. He shoved it into my hand like it was a dirty drug deal. "Go buy a hair clip or something," he whispered, his eyes darting toward the stairs. "Just don't tell your mother." That $10 bill was crinkled and cold. It wasn't an act of love. It was hush money. It was the fee he paid so he wouldn't have to grow a spine and defend his oldest daughter against his wife's cruelty. I didn't spend it. I tucked it into a small savings box. It was my first piece of the exit strategy. On graduation day, nobody pulled out a camera for me. They were too busy recording a video of Vivian doing some dance routine in the backyard. That night, sitting on my thin mattress, I opened a flyer for the U.S. Army. Honor, financial independence. My eyes locked onto the words about tuition assistance and housing. I realized I didn't need a room with morning sun anymore. I needed a place where my value was calculated by my endurance, not by the coldness in my mother's eyes. The next morning, I packed everything I owned into one rucksack and signed the papers. I thought that leaving Greenwich meant I was cutting out the cancer. I thought I was free. But when you grow up starved for a scrap of affection, you carry a hole inside you that you can't see. And that hole is exactly what the predators look for when they are picking their next meal. A starving dog picks up any scrap of meat on the asphalt. At 24, I was that dog. I picked up Kevin. I was desperate for a home that didn't come with a side of comparison or a price tag on affection. Kevin was a smooth talker. He had a way with words of affirmation that I had never heard from my father in 3 decades. For a while, I let myself believe the lie. But masks always slip. The moment I got my orders for a long-distance training rotation, the cracks appeared. Kevin didn't like a woman in uniform. He started picking at me. He told me the camo made me look bulky and masculine. He started isolating me, acting like my service was a personal insult to his manhood. The gaslighting was subtle at first, then it became the air I breathed. The breaking point hit during my 7th month of pregnancy. I came home early from a shift, my back aching and my feet swollen inside my boots. I pushed open the bedroom door. The air was thick with the cloying scent of cheap perfume, the kind sold at drugstores for $10 a bottle. Strangers' clothes were scattered on the hardwood. Kevin was there. He didn't even look guilty. I didn't scream. I didn't throw a vase. My officer training kicked in like a mechanical override. Identify the threat, cordon the area, evacuate. I turned around, grabbed a suitcase, and started throwing in the essentials. Socks, underwear, uniforms. 1 week of life packed into a bag. I moved with a cold, terrifying efficiency. I didn't shed a single tear in front of him. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me bleed. I drove to a small, cramped rental I'd scouted weeks prior. My 7-month belly felt like a lead weight against the steering wheel. I sat in the driveway, the engine idling, and dialed my mother. I didn't want money. I didn't want a lecture. I just needed to hear 4 words. Come on home, honey. The line clicked open. When I told her Kevin had a girl in our bed, there was a long, heavy silence. Then came that familiar sigh, the one that sounded like a razor blade dragging across skin. I told you, Bella, she said, her voice flat. You're too rigid. You don't know how to make a man feel like a man. Vivian would never let her husband get so neglected that he had to go outside for it. I bit my lips so hard I tasted the metallic tang of blood. I didn't sob. I just stared at the dashboard. Thanks, Mom, I said, and I hung up. 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed. A text from Vivian. Heard you got dumped. Maybe try some therapy. This is honestly so embarrassing for the family. They didn't see a pregnant woman drowning. They saw a spectator sport. They saw a chance to score points. Ethan was born on a Tuesday in the middle of a brutal New York winter. I became a single mother and a captain at the same time. Grit was the only thing keeping the lights on. My life became a series of 0400 wake-up calls. I'd stand in the dark kitchen, shaking a bottle of formula with one hand while spit-shining my black combat boots with the other. My back always hurt. My eyes were always red. There were nights I'd come home from the field, caked in dried mud and smelling of cordite, and I'd just collapse on the sofa with Ethan tucked into my side. I didn't have a village. I had a mission. I took every scrap of hazard pay the Army offered. Every deployment, every dangerous rotation, I signed up. That money went straight into a high-yield savings account for my son. Nobody from the Powell house showed up for Ethan's first birthday. Not a card, not a single pack of diapers. I built an invisible fence around us. Ethan and I were an independent squad. No reinforcements needed, no outside aid accepted. By the time Ethan turned 4, I had saved enough. I bought my first apartment, a clean, quiet place with a view of the city. No man's name was on the deed. No inheritance from my parents touched the down payment. I sat on the floor of the empty living room and looked at my bank balance. My armor was complete. I stopped hoping for a family miracle. I treated Thanksgiving like a diplomatic mission. I'd show up on time, hand over a bottle of decent wine, trade 3 minutes of small talk, and vanish before Vivian could start her highlight reel. I thought I had secured the perimeter. I thought I had reached a ceasefire. If you have ever felt like the black sheep of your own family, like every choice you made was a mistake in their eyes, hit that like button right now. Let's show the Powell family they are outnumbered. Comment the word strong below if you've ever had to build your own fortress from nothing. I read every single one of your stories, but the universe wasn't done with me. 2 weeks ago, a gold-plated envelope landed on my mat. A wedding invitation for Vivian and some hotshot lawyer named Daniel Mercer. It wasn't a request. It was an order for my final destruction. And for the first time in years, I felt my hands shake. Daniel Mercer walked into the Powell house 2 years before the wedding was even a thought. He was a child rights lawyer, sharp. His eyes worked like a high-end scanner, taking in the room before he even took off his coat. Dinner was the usual performance. My mother ran the show, spinning tales about Vivian's latest genius move in the real estate market. My father just nodded, his face a mask of compliance as he poured expensive Cabernet. I sat at the far corner of the mahogany table. My job was simple: be silent. I spent the meal cutting a small piece of chicken breast into perfect cubes for Ethan. Ethan reached for his juice, his elbow bumping a heavy metal spoon. It hit the hardwood with a loud, ringing clatter. The sound cut through my mother's story like a gunshot. Vivian clicked her tongue, her face twisted in a sneer. My mother didn't speak. She just leveled a cold, sharp glare at my son. But Daniel didn't look annoyed. He leaned down, his tuxedo jacket pulling tight across his shoulders, and picked up the spoon. He didn't hand it to me. He looked straight at Ethan. He pointed at the little plastic T-Rex tucked into my son's pocket. A Tyrannosaurus. That's my favorite too. Did you know they could run up to 20 miles per hour? Ethan's eyes, usually wide with the fear of being too loud, suddenly sparkled. For the first time in that house, someone didn't look at us like we were a mess to be cleaned up. After dinner, I was out in the parking lot, lugging a heavy bag of trash to the bin. The Greenwich night air was damp. Daniel was leaning against his black sedan, the tip of his cigarette glowing in the dark. He watched me drop the bag. He didn't offer to help. He just watched. "Does your family always treat you like this?" he asked. His voice was deep, level, no pity, just a question. I stopped. I squared my shoulders, my military posture kicking in. My shield was up. "Like what?" Daniel took a slow drag and blew the smoke into the cold air. "Like you're invisible. Like you're a ghost haunted by your own relatives." I wanted to snap back. I wanted to give him a rehearsed, polite lie about family dynamics. But he stepped closer. "You're a good mom, Bella. Ethan has incredible reflexes. He feels safe when he's near you. I can see it." 32 years. I'd lived 32 years in this world, and no one had ever said those words to me. Not my mother, not my spineless father. My throat felt like it was closing up. I couldn't breathe. I didn't say thank you. I just nodded, a sharp, jerky movement of my head, and walked away before the cracks in my armor became visible. That small spark of kindness was buried fast. A few months later, the order for destruction arrived. It came in a gold-plated envelope that smelled like old money and arrogance. A $150,000 wedding at the Carlisle Hotel. Along with the heavy cardstock was an email from Vivian. A list of family-style requirements. The email was cold. "Mom and I are wearing white and cream. Bella, you wear ash gray. Nothing loud. Keep your hair flat. No big styles. And leave Ethan at home. Kids are a distraction we don't need." I stared at the blue light of the screen. It wasn't an invitation. It was a disarmament order. She wanted me there to fill a chair, but she wanted me muted. I was a single mother. I didn't have a nanny. I didn't have a backup. I typed back a short, one-line reply. "Ethan is coming with me. I'll keep him quiet." My mother's response hit my inbox 2 minutes later. "Table 23, don't let him wander." I checked the floor plan. Table 23. It was a tiny, cramped circle shoved right against the swinging doors of the kitchen. The camera dead zone. The place where the light didn't reach and the guests didn't look. On the day of the wedding, I walked into the Carlisle ballroom like I was entering enemy territory. I wore the ash gray dress. It was stiff, cheap fabric that felt like sandpaper against my skin. I had slicked my hair back, pinned tight against my scalp. I was the perfect camouflage, a shadow in a room full of light. Ethan was dressed in a little suit, his small fingers wrapped tight around two of mine. He stared up at the crystal chandeliers, his eyes reflecting the glitter of a world that didn't want him. My parents swept past us. They were draped in silk and wool that cost more than 6 months of my captain's salary. They were busy laughing with VIPs, their teeth white and predatory. They walked right past table 23. They didn't even blink. I pulled out a chair and sat Ethan down. Every time the kitchen doors swung open, a blast of hot air and the smell of garlic grease hit my back. It was loud. It was humiliating. I sat there, back straight, eyes forward. I was a soldier on a recon mission, waiting for the trap to spring. Suddenly, the jazz quartet stopped. The bright chandeliers dimmed until the room was bathed in a soft, artificial glow. The chatter died down. A sharp, rhythmic clinking of silver against crystal rang out from the head table. Vivian stood up. She held the microphone like a scepter. She didn't look at her new husband. She didn't look at the crowd. She turned her head slowly, scanning the room until her eyes locked onto the darkness of table 23. Her lips curled into a slow, cruel smirk. The hunt was on. The silver fork hit the lead crystal glass with a sharp, rhythmic ping. The sound sliced through the jazz music like a razor through silk. Silence didn't fall. It crashed. 200 people in the Carlisle ballroom froze, their faces bathed in the warm, expensive glow of the chandeliers. I sat at table 23. The shadows from the kitchen door swallowed us. I kept my back straight, shoulders squared, chin parallel to the floor. The posture of a captain who had spent a decade wearing 40 pounds of gear in places where the air smelled like cordite. Here, the air smelled like sour, fermented champagne and white roses. Vivian stood on the stage. The spotlight caught the diamonds at her throat, making her look like a saint carved out of ice. She tapped the microphone. The feedback shrieked, a high-pitched needle that made the guests wince. She didn't care. She scanned the room, her eyes moving like a predator through tall grass. When her gaze hit the darkness of table 23, her lips curled into a slow, jagged smirk. "Today is the day I step into my perfect life," she said. Her voice was honey poured over broken glass, fake, sweet, deadly. "But before we toast, I want to use my sister, Bella, as an example. A cautionary tale for all of you." 200 heads turned. 400 eyes tracked the spotlight as it swung toward the kitchen door. The light hit me like a physical blow. I didn't blink. I didn't look away. I watched the room through the tactical lens of a soldier under fire. Target identified. Ambush initiated. Vivian pulled a small piece of paper from the folds of her white silk gown. She had rehearsed this. She had polished every word until it was sharp enough to draw blood. "Bella is a single mother," she announced to the room. Her tone suggested I was a disease they might catch. She jumped into a marriage, got kicked to the curb just as fast, and now look at her, sitting back there, silent, alone. A ripple of laughter started at the tables near the front. The aunts, the cousins, the people who shared my last name, but not my soul. Vivian leaned into the mic, her voice rising to a sharp, high-pitched crescendo. "My sister is used goods, a defective item that no self-respecting man would ever want. She is living proof that if you aren't good enough, you get thrown out with the trash." The ballroom erupted. It wasn't a polite chuckle. It was a roar of mockery. Then the secondary explosion hit. My mother, Patricia, stood up at the head table. She didn't try to stop her younger daughter. She raised her champagne glass high, pointing it at me like a loaded weapon. "She's trash!" Patricia screamed. Her face was flushed, her eyes bright with the thrill of the kill. I sat like a statue. I was a soldier. I had been trained to breathe through the adrenaline, to find the quiet center of the storm. I could take the insults. I could take the public execution of my dignity. I had survived Greenwich. I could survive this. Beside her, my father sat. He didn't stand up. He didn't defend his firstborn. He simply raised his hand to his face, hiding a thin, cowardly smirk as he watched the crowd tear me apart. They were drinking my blood for entertainment. But then, the air changed. I felt a sudden, violent tug on my sleeve. Ethan, my 5-year-old son, had dropped his piece of potato. It rolled across the tablecloth, forgotten. His small hand was clamped around my fingers, shaking. His skin was clammy. Cold sweat dampened his palms. He looked up at me. His eyes were wide, round, and filled with a terror I'd only seen in people who knew they were about to lose everything. He looked at the laughing crowd, then back at me. His lip trembled. "Mommy," he whispered. His voice was a tiny, fragile thread in the roar of the ballroom. "Why are they laughing at you? Did you do something bad?" The question pierced through 32 years of Kevlar armor. It cut through the discipline, the rank, and the ironclad stoicism. The room went silent in my head. The only sound was the frantic, uneven thudding of my own heart against my ribs. I felt the heat rise. It wasn't the slow burn of embarrassment. It was the white-hot flash of a fuse hitting the blasting cap. Hot blood rushed to my brain. I let go of Ethan's hand. I leaned forward, slamming both palms flat against the white tablecloth. I was done being the silent observer. I was done being the victim in their twisted play. I was going to stand up, and I was going to burn this entire house of cards to the ground. I prepared to push my chair back. I prepared to scream the truth until their ears bled. But before my boots could leave the floor, a heavy sound cut through the laughter. Thud. A chair at the VIP table didn't just move. It was shoved back with enough force to nearly topple. A tall figure in a black tuxedo stood up. His jaw was locked so tight the muscle in his temple pulsed. It wasn't my father. It was Daniel Mercer. The groom. He didn't look at his bride. He didn't look at his new mother-in-law. He looked at the shadows in the back of the room. He looked at me. Then he looked at Ethan. Daniel stepped away from the table. His eyes were dark, flat, and dangerous. The laughter died. The ballroom held its breath. Daniel sidetracked the white roses and the crystal centerpieces. He began to walk, not toward the kitchen door, toward the microphone. Daniel didn't run. He didn't rush. He moved with a heavy, deliberate stride that made the hardwood floors of the Carlisle groan under his boots. Every step was a hammer blow against the silence. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The air in the ballroom had turned into liquid lead. Vivian was still standing on the stage, her hand frozen near the mic. That smug, hunting smile still etched onto her face like a jagged scar. But as Daniel got closer, that smile didn't just fade, it shattered. Her eyes went wide, searching for the man she thought she owned. She found a stranger instead. A stranger with a locked jaw and eyes that burned with a cold, terrifying fire. Behind the head table, my mother, Patricia, had stopped laughing. She sat there with her hand still gripping the stem of her champagne glass, her knuckles white. The thrill of the kill had evaporated, replaced by a prickling fear. Daniel reached the stage. He didn't look at the roses. He didn't look at his bride. He reached out and snatched the microphone from Vivian's hand. He didn't ask. He took it. The movement was violent and sudden. A sharp, piercing screech of feedback ripped through the speakers, a sound so shrill it made people in the front rows clutch their ears. Daniel stood in the center of the stage, the spotlight reflecting off his face. He looked like a man who had just stepped off a battlefield and into a circus. He didn't look at the 200 guests. His eyes were locked onto the darkness of table 23. He was looking at Ethan. My son was still huddled against me, his small hand damp with cold sweat, his heart hammering against my ribs. "I am a lawyer," Daniel's voice boomed through the speakers. It wasn't the voice of a groom. It was the voice of a judge delivering a death sentence. It was mechanical and devoid of any warmth. I spend my life pulling children out of toxic, dangerous environments. I fight for the kids who have no voice. I have seen some of the worst people this country has to offer. He raised a long, steady finger and pointed it directly at our table. The spotlight followed. That boy over there is 5 years old. 5. And you people, you sophisticated Greenwich elite, just sat there and watched a grown woman humiliate his mother for sport. You forced a child to witness his own family tear his world apart for a laugh. The ballroom was a graveyard. Daniel turned his head sharply toward the head table. He looked Patricia right in the eye. You called her trash, he said, the words hitting like a physical punch. In front of your own grandson. You stood there and screamed insults at your own blood to entertain a room full of strangers. He paused, his voice dropping to a dangerous, low rumble that felt like a predator growling in the dark. You aren't a mother, Patricia. You're an abuser. You are the kind of person I spend my career keeping children away from. Vivian finally found her voice. She lunged forward, her white silk dress rustling like dry leaves. She grabbed Daniel's arm, her face twisting into a mask of desperation. The crocodile tears started to flow, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Dan, honey, what are you doing? It was just a joke. We were just having fun. You are ruining everything. Daniel didn't look at her tears. He looked at the hand on his arm like it was a piece of filth. He jerked his arm away, nearly sending her stumbling back into the wall of white roses. A joke? He spat. The word was a bullet. I saw the paper in your hand, Vivian. I saw the ink. You didn't just joke. You wrote a script. You sat down. You thought of the most painful things you could say to your sister, and you printed it out. You used your own wedding to perform a public execution. He stepped back, putting distance between himself and the woman in the white dress. He looked at her like she was something he had found on the bottom of his boot. I do not marry cruel people, and I sure as hell will not step foot into this sick, twisted family. The wedding is over. There is no marriage. A collective gasp hissed through the room. My father, the man who had spent 30 years hiding in the shadows of my mother's cruelty, finally scrambled up. He stumbled onto the stage, his hands fluttering like trapped birds. Daniel, please, he stammered, his voice weak and pathetic. Let us just calm down. We can talk about this in private. The relatives are watching. Think of the reputation. Daniel let out a short, dry laugh. He tilted his head toward table 4. The reputation is already dead, Mr. Powell. At table 4, my cousin Mike was frozen. He was holding his smartphone high on a selfie stick, his face pale. On the screen, a bright red dot pulsed. Live. Mike here has been live streaming the whole thing, Daniel said, his voice flat. He wanted to show the relatives on the West Coast how fancy this wedding was. Instead, he showed 50 members of your family exactly who you are. Every word, every scream, every sick laugh. It is all on the internet now. There is no hiding it. Mike looked like he wanted to vanish. The realization hit the room like a tidal wave. The masks were off. The perfect Powell image was a pile of ash. Daniel didn't wait for a response. He didn't look back. He took the microphone and held it out over the stage. He let go. The mic hitting the floor was the final mark. He stepped off the stage, his black tuxedo a dark shadow against the white roses. He walked down the center aisle, his eyes never wavering. He pushed through the heavy doors and vanished into the night. I sat there in the silence, my hand over Ethan's ears. I looked at the stage, at my family, and for the first time, I did not see monsters. I saw small broken people shivering in the light of their own destruction. Daniel Mercer didn't look back as the heavy oak doors of the Carlisle swung shut behind him. The sound was final, a dull wooden thud that signaled the end of the Powell family's perfect facade. For a heartbeat, the ballroom was a vacuum. Then, the explosion hit. Vivian didn't just cry, she came apart. She collapsed onto the marble floor, her $5,000 Vera Wang gown looking like a pile of discarded tissues. She wailed, a shrill guttural sound that echoed off the crystal chandeliers. But Patricia, my mother, didn't go to her. She didn't offer comfort. She didn't move toward the daughter on the floor. Instead, she pivoted. Her high heels snapped against the floor, a sharp rhythmic sound like a firing squad loading their rifles. She didn't walk toward table 23, she charged it. Her face was a terrifying shade of crimson, the skin around her eyes tight and white with fury. She reached our table and slammed her palms down so hard the silverware jumped. Her manicured nails dug into the white linen, threatening to rip the fabric. "What did you do, Bella?" Her voice was a hissed snarl, sprayed with the bitter smell of expensive gin. "What did you say to him? You poisoned his mind. You couldn't stand to see her happy, could you? You're so damn jealous of your sister that you had to burn the whole house down." It was the old play, the only play she knew. Set the house on fire and blame the person who smelled the smoke. 10 years ago, those words would have gutted me. I would have stuttered an apology. I would have begged for her to believe I was innocent. But 10 years ago, I wasn't a captain in the United States Army. 10 years ago, I hadn't learned that some people aren't worth the breath it takes to argue. I looked at her. My face was a blank slate. No anger, no sadness, just a flat, gray indifference. This was the gray rock. I wasn't a daughter anymore. I was a stone in a river, letting her scream wash over me without leaving a mark. I didn't say a word to him, Patricia. My voice was steady, monotone, devoid of any sir or ma'am or mom. It was the sound of a dead line. He has eyes, he has ears. He decided the smell of this family was finally more than he could stomach. Patricia's mouth fell open, her teeth bared like a cornered animal. She looked like she wanted to strike me, but the sheer coldness in my eyes made her flinch. Behind her, my father stumbled over. He didn't look at the ruin of the wedding. He didn't look at Vivian. He grabbed my upper arm, his fingers weak and trembling. "Bella, please," he stammered, his breath smelling of cowardly sweat and fear. "Just say you're sorry. Fix this. Make a scene of apology for the relatives. We can still save face if you just admit you were wrong." I looked at his hand on my arm. I didn't shake him off. I just waited until he felt the weight of my silence. He let go as if I were made of ice. I didn't look at them again. I leaned down and scooped Ethan up. He was heavy, his small arms locking around my neck like a life preserver. His heart was still thumping against my shoulder, a frantic little drum. I tucked his head into the crook of my neck, shielding him from the sight of the woman who shared his DNA, but none of his heart. "Let's go, kid," I whispered. "Mission's over." I turned my back on the table. The exit was 40 feet away. In a ballroom, 40 feet is nothing. In a minefield, it's an eternity. I didn't run. I didn't rush. I walked with my spine straight, my chin up, and my heels clicking a steady military cadence. My eyes were fixed on the green exit sign above the doors. I didn't scan the room. I didn't check for who was whispering or who was recording on their phones. I moved through the crowd like they were shadows. "If you walk out that door, Bella, don't you ever come back," Patricia screamed from behind me. Her voice was cracking, a desperate, ugly sound. "You hear me? You're dead to this family. You're nothing. You're a used-up loser with a brat no one wants." The words hit my back and fell to the floor like scrap metal. They used to be the things that kept me awake at night. Now they were just noise, background static. I didn't flinch. I didn't turn my head even a millimeter. The heavy glass doors of the Carlisle opened. The transition was instant. The smell of grease, perfume, and desperation was replaced by the bite of a New York October. The wind was cold, sharp, and carried the scent of rain and exhaust. It felt like a baptism. I stepped onto the sidewalk. Under the yellow hum of the streetlights, Daniel Mercer was leaning against his car. He had his jacket off, his tie loosened. He looked like a man who had just escaped a prison cell. He saw us and straightened up. He didn't say he was sorry. He didn't ask if I was okay. He knew. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a heavy matte black business card. He pressed it into my hand. Our fingers brushed for a second. His were warm, mine were like stone. "You just saved that boy from a lifetime of being a punching bag, Bella," he said, his voice gravelly and real. "If they try anything, legal threats, harassment, anything, you call me. I'm a child rights lawyer. I'm very good at making people like them disappear." I nodded once, a sharp, professional acknowledgement. I didn't have the words for gratitude yet. I walked to my car, tucked Ethan into his car seat, and clicked the belt home. The sound of the latch was the most satisfying thing I'd heard all night. I climbed into the driver's seat and gripped the wheel. Ethan looked at me through the rearview mirror, his eyes still shiny with leftover tears. "Mommy?" he asked softly. "Are you sad?" I turned the key. The engine roared to life, a steady mechanical promise of distance. I looked at the dark reflection of the hotel in my mirror and then looked at my son. For the first time in 32 years, I felt the weight lift off my chest. I felt light. I felt dangerous. "No, baby," I said. "Mommy has never felt better." I shifted into gear and pulled away from the curb, leaving the lights of the Carlisle behind. But as my phone began to buzz incessantly in the cup holder with the first wave of a digital war, I knew the Powells weren't done. They were just getting started. The kitchen was dark. The only light came from the pale blue glow of my phone, reflecting off the granite countertop like a cold, digital ghost. Outside the city was a low hum of sirens and tires on wet asphalt. But inside, the silence was heavy. Then, the buzzing started again. Buzz, buzz, pause, buzz. It was a frantic, desperate sound. A trapped insect hitting a window pane. I didn't pick it up. I didn't even touch the glass. I just sat there, my back against the hardwood of the kitchen chair, watching the notifications stack up. 47 missed calls. 47 attempts to reclaim a territory they had already lost. The text messages were a barrage of psychological warfare. My mother, Patricia, had moved past the screaming phase and into the medical emergency phase, a classic play in the narcissist's handbook. "I'm having chest pains, Bella. My heart is racing because of what you did. If I end up in the ER, it's on your head. Pick up the phone." I stared at the words. 2 hours ago, she was screaming insults at me in a ballroom. Now, she was a fragile victim. It was a lie. I knew her vitals better than she did. She had the heart of a shark, cold, steady, and built for the hunt. Then came Vivian. Her messages were shorter, sharper. "You're a thief, Bella. You whispered something to Daniel. You lured him away. You always wanted what I had. You're pathetic. Everyone knows you're the reason he left. And finally, my father, the coward's contribution. Just apologize, honey. Call your mother. Say you're sorry for the misunderstanding. We can still fix the family name if we move fast. Don't be stubborn." I poured a glass of ice water. The cubes clinked against the glass, a sharp, clean sound in the dark. I didn't feel the urge to defend myself. I didn't feel the need to explain that I hadn't said a word to Daniel. A soldier doesn't negotiate with a junk signal. You just let the noise dissipate into the ether. I was waiting for something real. At 08:47 the next morning, the real intel arrived. A notification popped up from Rachel. She was the only cousin on the Powell side who didn't care about the Greenwich social ladder. She worked as a social worker in Philly and had spent her whole life being the other black sheep. The message was just a file attachment. 17 screenshots. I opened the first one. My heart didn't race. It didn't sink. It just went still. The group chat was named Wedding Plan No Bella. It had been active for 2 weeks. I zoomed in on the timestamps. October 14th, 10 days before the wedding. Vivian. "I'm going to put her at table 23, near the kitchen. It's perfect. She won't be in any of the professional shots. I want her to see what a real life looks like compared to her mess." My mother had replied with a heart emoji. Patricia? Good. She needs a reality check. I'm tired of her acting like she's better than us just because she wears a uniform. I've got a script for the speech, Viv. We'll make it funny. A little tough love to show everyone why she's single. Vivian. Exactly. I'm gonna call her used goods in front of Daniel's fancy lawyer friends. It'll be a riot. She'll just sit there and take it like she always does. She's too disciplined to make a scene. I scrolled through the rest. It was a playbook for a public execution. They hadn't just lost their temper at the Carlisle. They hadn't been stressed by the wedding. They had sat in their air-conditioned living rooms, sipping coffee, and systematically planned how to break me in front of 200 people. They had practiced the insults. They had coordinated the seating to maximize the humiliation. They had used my son's presence as a tool to make me stay in my seat while they spat on me. something inside me didn't just break. Nurture and hope are fragile things, and they finally turned to ash. 32 years of trying to be good enough for a mother who saw me as a prop. 32 years of accepting my father's hush money instead of his protection. All of it evaporated. The rage didn't come. Rage is hot. Rage is messy. What I felt was a bone-deep, glacial cold. It was the absolute clarity of a commander who realizes the bridge behind them has been blown. There was no way back. There was no working it out. There was only the severance. I set the water glass down. My movements were precise, mechanical. I opened my contacts. Patricia Powell. Block, Vivian Powell. Block, the coward, Dad, block. I didn't stop there. I went through Facebook, Instagram, every digital thread that connected my life to their poison. I didn't write a long emotional post. I didn't send a final email explaining my feelings. They didn't deserve my words. Explaining your pain to an abuser is just giving them a map of where to strike next. I deprived them of the one thing they valued more than money: access. I was officially no contact. I put the phone face down on the counter. The buzzing stopped. The screen stayed dark. For the first time in my entire life, my home was a fortress. The air felt lighter. The smell of the old boiler room from my childhood was gone, replaced by the clean, neutral scent of my own apartment. Ethan walked into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes, wearing his dinosaur pajamas. He looked at me and tilted his head. "Mommy, is the loud phone asleep?" I picked him up and felt the solid, honest weight of him against my chest. "Yeah, baby," I said. "The phone is asleep, and it's going to stay that way." If you have ever realized that your family was actually your biggest enemy, hit that like button. We aren't born into safety. Sometimes we have to build it ourselves. Comment the word freedom below if you've ever had to block a toxic person to save your own life. I see you. But as I looked out the window at the street below, I saw a familiar silver sedan idling at the curb. My mother wasn't having a heart attack. She was sitting in my driveway. The digital war was over. The physical invasion was about to begin. The Saturday morning silence didn't fade. It was murdered. 3 days had passed since the Carlisle Hotel turned into a graveyard for my family's reputation. 3 days of peace. 3 days of looking at the dead screen of my phone and feeling the weight lift off my ribs. I was in the kitchen, pouring a second cup of black coffee, when the first blow hit the front door. Thud. The wood groaned. The frame rattled. It wasn't a knock. It wasn't the polite rap of a neighbor asking for sugar. It was a violent, rhythmic pounding that made the dust dance in the morning light. I didn't jump. My heart didn't skip. I set the coffee mug down on the granite counter with a slow, deliberate click. I walked to the hallway and looked through the peephole. My mother's face was distorted by the glass, a fish-eyed mask of pure, unadulterated rage. Her hair was a mess, and her mouth was moving in a silent snarl. My father stood 3 feet behind her, staring at the numbers on my door like he was waiting for a bus that would never come. He looked small. He looked like a ghost in a cheap windbreaker. I didn't open the door. Not yet. I turned and walked into the living room. Ethan was on the floor, surrounded by plastic dinosaurs and Lego bricks. He had stopped playing, his head tilted, his eyes wide and dark, with a fear he shouldn't have known at 5 years old. I knelt beside him. I didn't whisper. I kept my voice low and level, the tone of a briefing. "Ethan, go to Mrs. Gable's next door. I already called her. She has the cartoons on. You stay there until I come get you. Do you understand?" He nodded, his lip trembling just enough for me to see. I kissed his forehead, grabbed his small jacket, and ushered him through the back balcony door that connected to the neighbor's unit. VIP secured. Perimeter clear. I walked back to the front door. The pounding was getting faster. Patricia was screaming now, ugly, jagged words about ungrateful daughters and the cost of the Carlisle ballroom. I reached out, gripped the handle, and pulled. I didn't open it all the way. I stood in the gap, filling the frame. I was a wall of muscle, memory, and cold, hard bone. I kept my hands at my sides, fingers loose but ready. Patricia didn't wait. She tried to shove her way in, her shoulder hitting my chest like a bird flying into a brick wall. I didn't budge. She smelled like stale gin and the humid, sour scent of a woman who hadn't slept in 72 hours. "Get out of my way, Bella," she shrieked. Her face was a terrifying shade of purple. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Vivian is a wreck. The deposit for the reception is gone. The Mercer family is suing for emotional distress. Our name is being dragged through the dirt on Facebook because of that little stunt you pulled." I looked down at her. I didn't blink. I didn't feel the old urge to explain myself. "I didn't pull a stunt, Patricia," I said. My voice was a dead thing, flat and dry. "I sat at table 23. I wore the ash gray dress you picked. I followed the orders. You're the one who pulled the trigger. Daniel just watched the bullet hit." "It was a joke," she screamed, her spit hitting my cheek. "A harmless family joke. You've always been so damn sensitive. You destroyed your sister's life over a few words." I reached into my back pocket and pulled out my phone. I didn't say a word. I just hit the gallery and turned the screen toward her face. It was the screenshot from October 14th. The used goods plan. "I read the script," I gawled. My voice rumbled in my chest, low and dangerous. "I saw the heart emoji you sent when Vivian suggested making it funny. You didn't lose your temper. You didn't have a glass of wine too many. You sat in your kitchen and you practiced how to break me in front of 200 people." Patricia's eyes darted across the screen. The purple in her face faded into a sickly, sallow gray. She couldn't gaslight her way out of a timestamp. My father finally stepped forward, his hands raised in a pathetic, placating gesture. "Bella, honey, your mother didn't mean it like that. We just wanted you to understand your place, to be part of the fun. Let's just go inside, have some tea, and talk about how we can fix this. We need to issue a statement. We need to get Ethan and take some family photos for the paper, to show we're united." I looked at the man I used to call Dad. "You stood there and laughed," I said. "You hid your mouth so no one would see your smirk while your wife called your daughter trash. You don't get to talk to me about tea." Patricia pushed him aside. She was desperate now. She tried to peek around my hip into the apartment. "Where is he? Where's my grandson? Ethan, Grandma's here. Come out and see Grandma." She reached out, her claw-like hand aiming for my shoulder to pull herself in. I didn't wait. I took one sharp, explosive step forward. I didn't hit her. I used my entire body weight to lean into her, a physical shove that sent her reeling back 2 feet into the hallway. "No!" The word didn't come from my throat. It came from my gut. It was the command voice that had echoed across 100 parade grounds. It was the sound of a line being drawn in the dirt. Patricia hit the opposite wall, her mouth hanging open in shock. "He is my son," I gawled, my voice vibrating with a decade of suppressed fury. "He is the only thing in this world that is purely good, and he will never, ever learn how to accept your poison. You think you have rights? You think being blood gives you a pass to destroy his mother and then kiss his cheek? You're wrong. You just lost your privilege, permanently." I stepped back into the apartment. Patricia opened her mouth to scream, her face twisting into a final, ugly mask of entitlement. "Don't ever come back," I said. I grabbed the heavy oak handle. Bam! The door hit the frame like a thunderclap. I didn't wait. I reached for the brass deadbolt and twisted it. Click. Then the secondary latch. Click. The hallway was gone. The screaming was muffled. I stood there in the silence of my own fortress, my hands finally starting to shake, listening to the sound of my own breath. The invasion was over. But as I looked at the closed door, I knew the real war was just moving to a different front. I didn't need to pull a trigger. I didn't need to plan a counteroffensive. The Powell house was already soaked in gasoline. All it took was one honest spark for the whole thing to go up. Mike's livestream didn't just stay on his Facebook page. It moved like a virus. It was saved, screen recorded, and blasted into every group chat in Greenwich before the sun even hit the horizon the next morning. The socialites, the women who played bridge with my mother and whispered behind her back for 20 years, finally had their payday. They didn't see a perfect family anymore. They saw a cheap, low-rent execution. I sat in my quiet kitchen, 3 days after the deadbolt clicked into place, and checked my email. A single message from Aunt Linda. She was the only one Patricia couldn't intimidate. "The country club gala is next month, Bella," the email read. "Your mother's name was quietly scrubbed from the board yesterday. The church charity group held an emergency vote. They don't want the Powell brand on their letterhead anymore. No one wants to be standing next to a woman who screams trash at her own blood. She's radioactive." I leaned back, the leather of my chair creaking in the silence. I didn't feel a surge of joy. I didn't smile. I just felt a heavy, grounded sense of reality. For 30 years, my mother had used reputation as a whip to keep me in line. Now, that whip had turned into a noose. Vivian's fall was even louder. She had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. But narcissists hate being ignored. Instead of staying quiet, she did exactly what I expected. She went on a digital rampage. She posted a 3-page rambling defense on every platform she owned. She called the video a distortion. She blamed her jealous, bitter sister for brainwashing her groom. It was a PR suicide note. The comments were a bloodbath. People I had grown up with, people who had watched me get sidelined for years, started speaking up. The used goods comment became a rallying cry against her. By Tuesday morning, the real estate firm where she worked had seen enough. The ethics investigation began. In high-end Greenwich real estate, you sell trust. No one wants to buy a $10 million mansion from a woman who bullies her sister's 5-year-old son for a laugh. The dump truck was the final touch. Daniel Mercer didn't send a lawyer to return the engagement gifts. He sent a heavy-duty industrial hauler. At noon on Wednesday, the truck backed into my parents' driveway, the hydraulic groan of the bed lifting echoing through the quiet street. 2 years of expensive crystals, silver platters, and white silk wedding decorations were dumped in a jagged, clattering heap right on their front lawn. It wasn't a return, it was a disposal. My phone buzzed on the counter at 3 p.m. An unknown number. I picked it up. "Bella, it's Daniel." His voice was steady, no drama, just the facts. "I'm calling to check on you and Ethan. My mother, the former state judge, called Patricia this morning. She didn't mince words. She told your mother that she didn't raise a son to marry into a nest of bullies. She told her she should be ashamed to call herself a grandmother." I stared out the window at the gray New York skyline. A former judge calling out a social climber. That was the killing blow. My mother's entire world was built on the approval of people like Daniel's mother. To be called a bully by a woman of that stature was a sentence Patricia would never recover from. "Thanks for the heads up, Daniel," I said. My voice was calm. No tremor. "You're a good soldier, Bella," he said, his tone softening just a fraction. "But the war is over. You don't have to fight people who don't deserve your ammunition. Take care of that boy." I hung up. I walked out onto the small balcony of my apartment. The air was cold, carrying the sharp scent of coming rain and city grit. Below me, the city was moving, indifferent to the collapse of a single family in Greenwich. I took a slow sip of my coffee. It was black, bitter, real. I didn't feel the need to celebrate. There were no victory parades for survivors of domestic war. There was just the absence of noise. The radar in my brain, the one that spent 32 years scanning for my mother's moods and my sister's traps, finally went dark. The battery was dead. I didn't want to recharge it. I watched the sun dip below the buildings, casting long, jagged shadows across the street. The Powells were busy trying to save their sinking ship. They were frantic. They were screaming into the void. They were probably practicing new lies even as the gift truck pulled away. But I wasn't listening. I set the mug down and walked back inside. The silence was clean. It was empty. It didn't smell like cordite or old grievances. I closed the balcony door and didn't look back. The mission wasn't to win. The mission was to survive. And for the first time in my life, I was standing on solid ground. I walked toward Ethan's room, listening to the quiet sound of his breathing. The ghosts were gone. I had burned the bridge, and the fire was finally dying down. 6 months is a lifetime in the army. It's enough time to move an entire battalion across an ocean or to realize that the person I used to be is finally dead. I sat in my new office at the base, the smell of fresh floor wax and industrial coffee filling the air. On the desk sat a small brass plate. It didn't say Captain anymore. It said Major Bella Powell. I ran my thumb over the engraved letters. The gold oak leaf on my shoulder felt solid. It was a weight I had earned, not a gift given to keep me quiet. But the real work didn't happen in the field. It happened on a beige leather sofa in a quiet office in North Jersey. Dr. Aris didn't give me platitudes. She didn't tell me to forgive and forget like the Sunday morning talk shows. She sat there with a clipboard and watched me thrum my fingers against my knee. We spent weeks peeling back the layers of the invisible uniform I'd worn since I was 5. The one made of shame and the constant vibrating need to be invisible. I learned that I wasn't a defective item. I was a victim of a system that traded love for compliance. I stopped looking for the why and started focusing on the how. How to breathe, how to exist without waiting for the next blow. Then there was Michael. He's a trauma surgeon at the city hospital. He spends his days stitching people back together after they've been broken by things they never saw coming. He doesn't look at me like a paycheck or a shield. He looks at me like a woman who survived a war he understands. We don't talk about forever. We talk about tonight. We talk about the way the light hits the Hudson River at sunset. He saw the scars on my soul and didn't try to offer a bandage. He just sat beside me in the dark and let me be. One Friday afternoon, the peace was interrupted. I was walking to my car in the base parking lot when I saw a familiar shadow. My father was leaning against a rusted-out sedan that looked nothing like the German luxury cars he used to polish in Greenwich. He looked small. His suit was wrinkled. The arrogance that usually sat on his shoulders like a heavy coat had been stripped away. He held a small box wrapped in cheap, crinkled blue paper. "Bella," he said. His voice was thin, like old parchment. "I've been waiting 2 hours." I didn't stop. I kept my stride even, my boots crunching on the gravel. "You're trespassing on a federal installation, Arthur. Go home." He scrambled to catch up, his breath coming in ragged, desperate hitches. "It's Ethan's birthday soon. Your mother. She's not doing well. She cries every night. She wants to see him. She says she loves you. In her own way." I stopped. I turned slowly, my hands shoved deep into my jacket pockets. The wind was cold, biting at my ears. I looked at him, really looked at him. I didn't see the man who used to decide if I was worthy of dinner. I saw a messenger for a ghost. "I spent 32 years waiting for that way to be enough," I said. My voice was a flat line. No anger, no heat. Just the cold truth of a judge. "I spent 3 decades bleeding because she didn't know how to be a human being. I'm not waiting anymore. The clock ran out at the Carlisle." "It's a gift, Bella. Just a toy." He held the box out, his hands shaking. "No," I said. The word was a deadbolt clicking into place. "It's a hook, and I'm not biting. Take the box. Take your guilt. Ethan doesn't need your ghosts. He's busy being happy." I climbed into my car. I didn't wait for him to respond. I didn't look in the rearview mirror as I pulled away. I left him standing there in the gray light of a Jersey afternoon, a man who had realized too late that you can't buy back the people you've spent a lifetime breaking. Sunday morning came with the smell of maple syrup and the sound of Lego bricks clicking together. My apartment was small, but the air was clean. It didn't smell like gin or resentment. Michael was sitting on the floor, his long legs tucked under him, helping Ethan build a fortress. The edges of the pancakes were slightly burnt, just the way Ethan liked them. The TV was low, playing some cartoon about space explorers. I stood in the kitchen doorway, holding a mug of black coffee. I looked at the refrigerator. There, held up by a cheap star-shaped magnet, was a drawing Ethan had brought home from kindergarten. It was a family tree. But it wasn't a tree. It was a map. There were no sprawling branches of aunts and cousins who laughed at our pain. There were no grandparents who demanded blood for the sake of an image. The drawing showed two figures, a woman in a green uniform and a little boy in a t-shirt with a T-Rex on it. They were holding hands. At the top, in jagged, oversized purple crayon, Ethan had written, "Ethan's Army Camp." The scars were still there. They always would be. But they didn't itch anymore. They were just marks on the map of how I got here. Many people say blood is a bond you can't break. They're wrong. Silence in the face of cruelty isn't love. It's a slow-motion suicide. I am Major Bella Powell. I finished the hardest mission of my life. I cut out the tumor and I saved the patient. I closed the door, I turned the key, and I never looked back.